The most important thing that has to happen in the process, I think this is a great question for any business owner, for any leader within any business owner's team. It's self-awareness. We can't get to team awareness. We can't get to the changes that we want to have until we have the self-awareness. And by self-awareness, I mean, who are we? And more importantly, who are we not? So getting comfortable with being who we are and who we're not.
You're listening to the Profit by Design podcast, episode 27. You work hard in your business. On the Profit by Design podcast, we ask the big question: what has your business done for you lately? Hi, I'm Dr. Sabrina Starling, the business psychologist, the author of How to Hire the Best, and your co-host on the Profit by Design podcast. Weekly, my co-host, Mike Bruno, and I bring you tips, tools, and strategies from our own experiences and from the experiences of our guests, who are entrepreneurial thought leaders and real-life entrepreneurs, all to support you in making intentionally profitable and sustainable business decisions to live the lifestyle you desire. Hey, Profit Designers. I am just back from our Breakthroughs on the Bayou 4-week vacation retreat. And oh my goodness, what an incredible experience. In this very room where I'm recording, we had 25, 30 plus high-level entrepreneurs gathered over the course of 3 days. And there were so many powerful connections and amazing breakthroughs that happened. I'm still riding high from the energy. And I just want to share with you, if you have never been to a retreat as an entrepreneur, I strongly encourage you to consider taking part in a retreat, especially, and not all retreats are created equal, obviously. So I'm giving a strong plug here. I'm totally biased for our Breakthroughs on the Bayou retreats. What I'm so aware of is that we have such high-level people. We screen our participants in our retreats very, very carefully. And we do a lot to prepare them coming into the retreat to be ready to support each other and lean in, that it's not just about what you take away, but it's also what you give. We have a strong value around being a gift from our gifts. And I saw so much of that in action this past week at our retreat. So I want to let you all know, as Profit Designers, if you are interested at all in taking part of our 2020 Breakthroughs on the Bayou 4-week vacation legacy retreat next March 2020, you're going to want to get your application in now. And there's a couple of reasons. Number one is our retreat fills very quickly from our alumni. It looks like we're probably going to only have about 6 spots remaining at this retreat. So, yeah, 6 spots. And as each day that goes by, the closer we get to filling the retreat, the less savings you have to take advantage of. Right now, we have super early bird savings in effect. So that means, and let me grab my notes here, that means you will save almost $2,300 off your registration from the early bird that is listed on our website. So if you get your deposit in now, you make payments until the retreat next year, and then you're all set. And I can tell you, this is not a one-time event. Once you attend our retreats, you're part of our community, and we are all here supporting you and bringing what we have, our gifts, to share with you to support you in being successful in creating your business to be sustainable, to be profitable, and to run without your daily involvement so that you can take vacations, a 4-week vacation. Just imagine what that would be like for yourself. So to get your registration, get your application in, you're going to want to go to 4weekvacation.com. And while you're there, be sure to download our 4-week vacation jumpstart guide that I've created just for those of you who are hearing this and you're thinking that you want to get things in motion for your business to be able to sustain a 4-week vacation for you. That jumpstart guide is going to get you off to a good start. Hey, Profit Designers. We are coming up very quickly on episode 30, and we would really love it if you are finding value in our podcast, if you would leave us an honest review in iTunes or whatever platform you are listening to us on. Leaving us a review will help us get discovered by more entrepreneurs who need the messages that we're sharing here on the Profit by Design podcast. Quite a few of you have started leaving us reviews, and I so appreciate it. Some of the comments that have been made are, it just fills me up because they're spot on with what Mike and I are trying to create here for you on the podcast. So we have one review from LLS442, and LLS442, I don't know who you are. So if you could message me maybe on Facebook and let me know who you are so I can be sure you get entered in our drawing. But what you wrote is you said, Sabrina and Mike interview real business owners that have made hard decisions to move their business forward. The conversations are truly informative. I am loving the clarity and truthfulness. Every episode has had useful facts that I find easy to relate to my personal situation. So thank you for that. And then Blue Collar Executive, and I know who you are, Blue Collar Executive, that's Steve Bousquet. He writes, the Profit by Design podcast is very helpful because the content is actually relevant to small businesses. There is no fluff and silliness that goes on in the podcast. It is all helpful content that we can use immediately in our business. The podcast is also helpful because it teaches you that all businesses everywhere are facing similar challenges, and that as an entrepreneur, we are not alone in these challenges. And there are answers to what sometimes seems like daunting questions and challenges. The guests on the Profit by Design podcast are actual business owners who have real-world experience and share some of the best and toughest times they've ever had in their business and in their life. And they share openly and honestly how they overcame and moved forward through all of those challenges. You can really learn from these guests and become more determined, more motivated, and more encouraged to keep learning, improving, and in growing your business. So thank you for that, Steve. That's exactly what Mike and I are intending to create here. So please, if you're finding value, leave us an honest review between now and episode 30, and you'll be entered in our drawing. We are giving away a copy of The Pumpkin Plan by Mike Michalowicz, my book, How to Hire the Best, and I will sign a book for you. I'll personalize it for you, and a Profit by Design podcast t-shirt. Hey, Profit Designers. On today's episode, you get to listen in on an interview that Mike and I had with Darren Virassammy. I met Darren at ProfitCON this past fall, and I was blown away by his talk that he gave about working and living from our strengths. Now, there's something that I firmly believe in, and I've seen it in action in the last 14 years that I've been coaching business owners. And here it is. We need to celebrate our wins and successes, but beyond that, we need to be intentionally doing more of what works. And at Tap the Potential, we have something going on that's working a lot in our clients' businesses. And that is helping them understand their personality type and their team members' types and getting them working from their strengths. And we use a tool called the People Map, which is a great tool for improving communication in the workplace and helping people who previously might have gotten on each other's nerves because of personality differences really embrace the strengths of the other. And because I have seen so much success happening from that, I have been looking for ways to help our clients deepen what they're already doing that works in terms of paying attention to their team members, their own and their team members' strengths. And that's why I'm so excited about Darren. Darren has been using StrengthsFinder and bringing StrengthsFinder into organizations and helping team members become more and more clear on their strengths and getting more and more aligned from a position of strengths. Now, here's what's so powerful for me in thinking about this. We know that in businesses that have highly engaged team members working from strengths that have a very strong sweet spot, those businesses tend to be or have the potential to be 200 to 10,000% more profitable than their peers in the same industry. Team member engagement, a large component of getting your team members engaged and working from their most productive capacity hinges on them working from their strengths. We are happiest on a daily basis when we get to work from our strengths. And I know for myself, when I'm working from my strengths, I get energy from my work. It fills me up. And the ability to work from our strengths is key to creating a great place to work. Darren is a big proponent of that, and I am too. So I am honored to be bringing him here for this conversation with you on the Profit by Design podcast. Darren Virassammy is the co-founder and chief operating officer of 34 Strong, comprised of a team that believes everyone deserves a great place to work and that any workplace can be great. Oh, I'm so about that. A leading expert in the global employee engagement community, the 34 Strong team leverages the strengths-based approach to human development to create massive shifts within organizations, both culturally and on the bottom line. Darren and his team have created sustainable change in small micro businesses all the way up to large organizational teams at the FDA, Bank of America, and the California Department of Public Health. Recently, Darren keynoted for Hitachi Global Women's Conference, the Rotary World Peace Conference, the Professional Grounds Management Society, and ProfitCON. And I also think it's fun to know some random facts about Darren. He's an electric bassist and closed down ProfitCON 2018 by performing a solo bass guitar piece he composed called Metamorphosis as a tribute to the journey of entrepreneurs. He holds a black belt in Kyokushin karate. Might not have pronounced that correctly. So you guys, if you know, let me know the correct way to pronounce that. A 3rd degree brown belt in Aki Jiu-Jitsu and loves training and teaching martial arts. He also enjoys daily cold showers, Wim Hof breathing, and regular cold water plunges. As a result, his wife and kids and many on his team think he is certifiably insane. Let's welcome Darren. So, Darren, I am so excited to have you here with us today. When I got to hear you speak at ProfitCON, I thought, oh my gosh, this man speaks my language. We need to have him on. And you are all about tapping people's strengths and tapping into potential within organizations. Your company is 34 Strong, and you guys are all about creating great places to work, which is very much what we do. And what I'm passionate about doing too is bringing strengths to bear in the workplace, getting everybody aligned with in the right seats, doing the right things for the business. So let's dive in right there. And I know that you came into this work, you're very passionate about what you do. So I want to hear a little bit about how did you get into this work and why are you so passionate about this type of work?
So I got into this work. It came via pain, like many things do in our lives. So I used to commute down. I live in Sacramento, California, and I used to commute down to the San Francisco Bay Area about 3 to 4 days per week. And as that was transpiring, I was going down to work and really just collecting a paycheck. I'd actually gotten really good at doing something that I really didn't like very much. I was a senior project manager for a large commercial construction company. So I was doing it. I was actually on a team that was actually pretty highly disengaged, and the organizational culture was pretty highly disengaged. And I knew something had to change. And that revelation really came for me when my daughter actually laughed out loud in my lap on a trip to Hawaii when she was 4.5 months old. Because I looked at her, Dr. Sabrina, and I realized, wow, you have all of this potential. You're going to laugh, you're going to walk, you're going to talk, you're going to do all of these things. What the heck happened to my potential? I still have it in me. I had it when I was a child. She has it now. What's going on in my world? So I came back from that trip, knew something had to change. I had gone through the process. I had taken this assessment called the Clifton StrengthsFinder. I thought it was amazing. It nailed me to a T, but something had to change. And from that trip, I came back and knew that I had to launch into it. You see, because at the same time I was working at that organization, I was also teaching at a college here in the Sacramento region, and that team was highly engaged. So I had these complete opposite ends of the spectrum that I was experiencing, and that moment made me realize I don't have to live like this. And I wanted to do my part in making sure that those that have to go to work every day, that basically every employee deserves a great place to work, and every workplace can be a great place to work. It takes work. That's what it is. So my why is because I've lived through it on both ends of the spectrum, and I personally, along with the team that we've built at 34 Strong, are really passionate advocates of making that a reality for any of the teams that we have the privilege of serving.
You know what I think is really interesting is I would imagine you were a great employee in that business that you were in as in your project management role, but you were aware you weren't being your best, and that was eating at your soul.
That is such a true story. So here's the thing that's crazy. At the time, I was a senior project manager, and I was actually the most profitable, which I think is important for this podcast and for listeners. I was actually the most profitable project manager that they had on the team for the jobs we were running and how we managed.
Darren, you may be getting some job offers after this.
Oh, really? Okay. No, I was. Yeah, I'm not going back. Not going back. No, but thank you. I was. And that's the thing that's amazing, right? So many people have gotten good at things that they don't like to do because they can rise in that environment. It's amazing what the human spirit can be. But at the end of the day, you're all about tap the potential, but we've tapped the potential, but we know there's something more than that. It's like the potential beyond the potential. We know that we've capped out in an area that's really not our true zone of genius, and there's more to give. And when you work really hard on something that you don't love, it's called stress. And when you work really hard on something that you love, and that you feel is making an impact, it's called passion. That's a paraphrase of a Simon Sinek quote, but that's something that's near and dear to my heart. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm working personally with clients to really ask the question, who am I being? Who are we being as an organization that can help make that transformation for leaders, not only in the work that they're doing with their teams, but also because when people are actually showing up as better versions of themselves, what happens when they go home? They're better versions of themselves to their family, to their spouse, to their kids, to their communities. What's the ripple effect of what this will look like for years to come? That's what gets me really, really fired up.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the phenomenon of A players not tapping their potential, because I spend so much of my time helping business owners hire A players, but if they're putting them in a role that's not tapping their full potential, I'm very aware of what's being lost, what's not being tapped into. And I personally relate to what you're sharing about how you were experiencing your work and how you noticed, your daughter, she's totally fully alive, and you were recognizing, I'm not totally fully alive. I think of myself as an A player. I think I was when I was an employee, and I was, winning Employee of the Year award and that sort of thing. But I was showing up late. I was leaving early. I was on the internet. Shh, don't tell my previous employers. But I was zoning out. And that's where I think our greatest opportunity is when we're working with these small businesses and they have A players on their team. How do we make sure that their A players are really tapping into their strengths?
Yeah, that place, I think what you talk about there is it's very, very important. And the thing is, the way that we naturally think, feel, and behave is important, right? So talent, as we define it through the StrengthsFinder language, it's your natural patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that can be productively applied. And this was a fascinating question that was asked many, many decades ago by Dr. Donald Clifton. He asked the question of what will happen when we focus on what's right with people instead of fixating on what's wrong with them. And when we go into focusing on what's right with people, we actually have to have a language on how we define talent and what that could look like. So what that ended up leading to was this whole process for the next decade. He studied nearly 2 million people to help identify these patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that could be productively applied. We're not talking about, hey, Mike, How good of a gardener are you? Are you a good painter? Or are you really good at playing the guitar or tap dancing or something like that? We're talking about things that we might not even think of as talents right off the bat. Things that we do so naturally and so well, we easily come to the notion of anybody could do this. It's so easy, anybody could do that. I give you an example of this, right? Like the fact that some people naturally are excellent list makers. They go out, they're able to really create lists, they're able to create tasks, they focus, they cross those things off the list, and they're real big producers. That's an example of talent. But then on the flip side, there's other talents where the fact that somebody might spend a lot of time doing some deep thought to really uncover some level that maybe we haven't thought of in the decision-making process to really help us get to the best decision. That's something that we can't easily see on a day-to-day basis as effectively because it's taking place right up here in their mind. But the whole strengths-based process actually gives people an opportunity to see themselves through a lens of self-awareness that maybe they haven't had before. And more importantly, see the others on their team through the lens of that. We've been conditioned to be well-rounded for so many years of our life, right? And this is a badge of honor for so many entrepreneurs. I'm the CEO, I'm the janitor, I'm the chief bottle washer, right? Whatever, right? And we're all laughing in here as we're looking at each other through this conversation because we've all done that. But the real question that we have to ask is, am I really creating the greatest return on my time invested? And is this the greatest return on time invested for the team? And do I have to be all things to all people? So what that leads to is yes to well-rounded teams. Yes to a well-rounded business of having players that can really complement areas that maybe we don't do as well. And no to well-rounded individuals. Do you? That's the thing that we can get into. One of my favorite bass players on the planet, as you know, Dr. Sabrina, I'm an electric bass player. One of my favorite bass players is a gentleman named Marcus Miller. He said at some point, you've just got to realize that nobody can do you better than you can do you. And that really gets into his vision on life and his vision in music. Because so often we try to replicate what somebody else is doing. You can do that to a point, but you're going to have your own thing that you can stand out on. We can create that awareness of how our talents align to create excellence, because excellence is a state of mind and it's an ongoing process. It's something that has to be sustained for the long term.
That's really great. And as I'm listening to you, my mind's, racing like usual. I have a lot of ideas and questions. And ironically enough, we have similar backgrounds because I actually have a couple businesses, but I'm actually in the commercial space right now, acting as a project manager, running jobs for a large company. But as I'm listening to you talk, so what's a mindset nugget that I can take away as this frustrated entrepreneur where, okay, I have this light bulb just went off and I'm hearing what you're saying about we need to concentrate on the strengths and that having a well-rounded team is going to be critical to the success and the sustainability of the organization. What's my first takeaway, to shift my own mindset to now be open to that and to be open to a transformation change and maybe changing the way that I've been thinking for 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is?
Using your words there, Mike, frustration. How do we move our frustration to fascination? That's a great question for us to ask. Now, that's a two-tier question. It's one, to ask ourselves internally, and two, to ask ourselves externally to those that we're working with. Because for ourselves, if we're frustrated with something, that's oftentimes a tell that one of our talents is being pushed in the wrong way. I'll give you an example of this. Sometimes for me, I have a StrengthsFinder theme called responsibility, and it's really big on accountability. So what that basically boils down to is if you tell me you're going to do something, do it by that date. If it's not done by that date, it's going to cause a lot of frustration for me. That's going to feel that way. And for some, that's not as big of a deal. Hey, if I told you it'd be done by Friday, I got it to you by Tuesday or Wednesday, and I didn't update you on the process, they might be okay with that. But that frustration that we have internally is a tell. When we have frustration with others, with their decision-making process, with what they're doing, when we have the language of talent, when we have the language of strengths that's built into our organization, a lot of times what you end up finding out, it's not that You and me, Mike, are at opposite ends of the spectrum, and I dislike you or you dislike me. What we end up finding out is we've got our talents that are a little disconnected right now. They're not really working together very effectively. So you can diffuse situations a lot of times in the lens of asking which of your talents are actually at play. But to do so, you have to have kind of a language to understand what that's about. And that's where it gets to. I give you an example of this. My wife, she's got some very different talents than I do. Some of her top talents are, they don't exist for me. They're on my bottom, shall we say, but they're really not ones that show up. And one of her talents is a theme called restorative in the StrengthsFinder language. And that theme, it's an incredible problem solver. It naturally sees different things that might be broken and how do we fix it. And both of us cook dinner at home. Both of us enjoy cooking. And my wife, when she cooks, in the past, when she would cook, she'd cook a dinner, we'd sit down as a family, and I'd be so excited. I'd say, thank you, Lisa. I really, really appreciate you. I really, really appreciate you cooking dinner. We'd sit down with the kids, we'd take the first bite, and then she'd take a bite and she'd say, you know what? This could have used a little bit more garlic. This could have used a little bit more salt, a little more pepper. You know what she was doing, guys? She was solving. I was hearing that as, why are you being so negative? And in her mind, she wasn't even being negative. She was being positive by solving that. So we've all played the game of telephone as a kid, right? I whisper something into your ear, Mike. You whisper it into Dr. Sabrina's ear. We go down the chain in a whole class. And what happens by the time it gets to person 10, what you started with is very different than what you end up with. That's exactly how communication takes place through the filter of our talents. So until we understand where those lenses are, it can really help alleviate some of that frustration that could be taking place.
I love this because one of the tools that we use with our clients on their teams is something called the People Map. And the StrengthsFinder is, I think that's kind of the next step after People Map, because the People Map is just broad brushstrokes of putting people into 4 quadrants of personality types. And what I see happening after that has been done on a team is a lot of the tension starts to dissipate. A tension that's been there previously. And it's exactly what you were describing, Darren, with your wife. Things are being misunderstood. Things that are being done by somebody with good intention are being interpreted by the receiver as, why would you do that? Why are you doing this? You're being critical or you're undermining what I'm trying to accomplish. But once everyone has an appreciation of there's different perspectives, there's different talents at play, there's different strengths, and that what's being done is actually being done with a good purpose, and that there's room and there's a need on that team to have a balance of the different strengths at play. What do you see when a business owner would take the StrengthsFinder and they start to become aware of their own strengths? What are some of the things that you see that start to happen right away from that?
Well, number one, the most important thing that has to happen in the process, I think this is a great question for any business owner, for any leader within any business owner's team. It's self-awareness. We can't get to team awareness. We can't get to the changes that we want to have until we have the self-awareness. And by self-awareness, I mean, who are we? And more importantly, who are we not? So getting comfortable with being who we are and who we're not. But to get to this lens of what you're talking about, that team awareness that started to transpire, it starts with self-awareness. So we go through this process. They take the assessment. We actually end up doing a walkthrough component with people to really get people to understand, get those business owners to understand who are you? And when you have these results, how does that apply to your business from a contribution standpoint? Being, what is it that you uniquely contribute the best? What is the greatest assets that you have personally through the filter of your talents in the way that you naturally think, feel, and behave? From that, we can move into the team awareness elements. And what starts to happen is a lot of the walls and the barricades that have been built up just saying, oh, me and John just don't get along. We just don't see eye to eye. We just don't connect. We can't work together. You start saying, okay, I can see that. I can understand that. We can have a way to work through this. Coming back to that example I gave about my wife, that used to be a little bit of a pain point. Like, it was something that I would get very frustrated about. I'd say, why are we being so negative? Why are we going through this? She understood where I was coming from, but as I went through this process with taking the StrengthsFinder. For both of us, we were now able to actually laugh about that because we've agreed at the dinner table, we won't solve the problem of I should have put more pepper in or I should have put more garlic or whatever it is, right? It's moved to like, let's enjoy dinner and then afterwards we can do the solving piece. So both of our needs are then met in the process because I understand she's going to have that need to output, but I understand the lens in which she's coming through. I'm never going to become that, but I can respect that. I can validate that. To get to that team point, nobody shows up to work wanting to be unvalued for the value that they create. Everybody wants to be valued for being valuable. One of my colleagues, a good friend of mine, Maureen Monty, who wrote just an incredible book on the strengths-based approach to human development into teams and for business owners, it's called Destination Unstoppable. And that's one of her quotes in there that she talks about. People want to be valued for being valuable. That's really what it is. And that's at the core of that particular message. You're not going to have a rabbit and a fish ever wanting to trade places in their roles. That rabbit is never going to want to get excited about swimming class. And that fish is never going to get excited about jumping class if they were going to school together. But yet, in our small businesses that we work in our teams that we're working on building, 1 employee, 2 employees at a time, it really matters in making sure that we're not trying to turn the rabbit into a fish or a fish into a rabbit because they just don't have the talent set. But if we can align, we can get to greater things.
I can share an example of that. A few months ago, my assistant approached me and she asked me, why are you having me do this for this other team member? And it was some scheduling stuff and following up with emails. She said, everywhere that I've worked before, that person in that role has always done that themselves. Why are you asking me to do that? And I had to explain, I said, the person who is in that role is excelling from this free spirit people side. They're not great with all the details and the dotting the I's and crossing the T's. You're great at that. That's why I want you doing that. And once I gave that explanation, she said, oh, I totally get it. Now I understand my job is to do what I do so that he can shine from his strengths.
Exactly. And you know, when you take that example, right, what does that do to your team? It gives each person a chance to show up creating value for the team, for the organization. So what do you think that leads to? That leads to increased profitability. That leads to increased customer satisfaction, some of these different areas. It's always interesting, right? Many businesses will want to have engaged clients. They want to have engaged customers. But if we've gotten to a place where our employees are struggling with engagement, if we've got disengaged employees or people are feeling like, hey, I'm being forced to do exactly what I don't do well, I feel trapped, I feel stuck, how are you going to get engaged customers? How are you going to improve that? Because your actual employees, the culture that you create in terms of how that team gels, that's what I mean by culture, how that team gels, how they interact, how that team interacts, that is the brand of your organization because each one of those people is your brand. And this gets folded right into that and it plays out and you can see it.
So I know you have some data on the level of engagement of employees in the United States. So can you share that with our audience?
Yeah. So I think on one of your previous podcasts, I think there was a great example. The global employee disengagement rate is about 87%. So it's about 87% of the workforce across the globe is disengaged, meaning that people are showing up to work, collecting a paycheck, and that's a combination of disengagement and active disengagement. I'll distinguish what those things are in just a moment here. In the United States, the numbers are a little different. The United States, we're actually best in breed. In the United States, 50% of our workforce is disengaged, and another 15% are actively disengaged. So that totals out to about 65% of our workforce is disengaged in some capacity. Now, that might sound completely atrocious and daunting to both of you and to many of our listeners, but I actually want to put that in the context of the growth that we've actually seen. So that's the most recent statistics. And in 2013, when Gallup conducted their State of the American Workforce, that's their most comprehensive that they do every 4 years and actually studying where engagement statistics lie, we were at about 70% of our workforce disengaged, right? And the active disengagement number was closer to 20% at that time. That disengagement number hasn't gone down, but active disengagement was. That matters massively because active disengagement costs the US economy and many businesses, the estimate is somewhere in the range of $300 to $400 billion a year. Let's think about that. Why? Because you're actively disengaged. They're the ones that are actively going out of their way to recruit others to join them. They're actively looking to get injured at work. They're the ones, they're walking down the hallway and they bump into an air molecule and they got to take time off from work as a result of that, right? They are becoming toxic within the organization. It's bringing others down. They're recruiting those that are on the fence, and that becomes incredibly costly. So when we can drive those numbers down, particularly in businesses like construction, right, where safety incidents, different things like that, that safety incidents can go down. In all businesses, you can have a dip in a lot of those areas as well. So we've actually made significant progress, but active disengagement, the fact that that's gone down so much is pretty critical.
I have a quick question about if I'm going to start this approach within my organization, what could I expect in terms of buy-in from the active employees that have seen me maybe behave badly, right? And not work from a strengths perspective and try to, put an entirely new culture in place around open communication and sharing ideas and sharing our feelings and really getting into this. So first part of the question is, can I have any expectation in terms of the potential buy-in? And then is it okay if I don't have 100% buy-in? And at what point would I also maybe replace employees because they're fighting what I'm trying to create?
I think that's a great question, Mike. The way that the buy-in process works, and this really is going to be a question based on business size. So for your really, really micro businesses under 10, where there's not like 2 or 3 people that are operating that might have more managerial or senior leadership type roles within that particular team, you're going to have to bring them together. I want to start with the teams where there are maybe a couple of leaders, because some of your listeners, they might have 2 founders or something like that, or 3 partners or something like that started the business together. But the most important thing to do is it's got to start with that leadership team, with whoever that is. If that tone from the top is not there, and that includes even if it's just a single business, it's really, really important that that single owner starts and is bought in to the process. And in buying into the process with creating the leadership start point, they've got to take the assessment. They've got to go through the process of digging into how they interact as a leadership team. If that dynamic doesn't stick, we are going to have some trouble in making it stick. So it is imperative that you don't roll it out straight to the whole organization if those key leaders are not bought in, because what that looks like is just one more failed attempt or people pulling in different directions. So I would say, for businesses where you have over 10 employees and you do have a couple of partners that might be involved or a couple of owners that are involved in the business, or even you could expand it to some of your key leaders or key managers, make sure they're bought in. Because if they're not, it's going to be lip service. It's going to be the soup of the day. And that's not what you want to do. That's not what creates long-term sustainable change. When there is pushback within the organization, we definitely have been through this with organizations that we work with and with small businesses. It takes time for this to go through. You're basically planting an acorn that has the potential to become an oak tree. That's what it is. So when there is that pushback, when it's going through, it's not a matter of like, hey, let's go in and just clean house, a month in or something like that. But what starts to happen, what we've seen, at least in our experience, within organizations, when there's somebody that is actively disengaged, they're a cave dweller, which is the nickname for that, is they're consistently against virtually everything, right? So when you've got cave dwellers on your team, what starts to happen, just think about it. When they're consistently against virtually everything, they operate in this spiral of trying to push things off on different people, hiding in the shadows. But when you start turning the lights on, like, no, this is the way that we're operating. This is the way that our team is going to function. Guess what's happened? The lights are on. You can't hide out in the corner. What we've seen pretty regularly in small businesses all the way up to some of our larger government and corporate clients that we work with, over time, those folks start to kind of move themselves out because guess what? The hiding places, there's no cave to actually hide in anymore because the lights are on in the cave.
You know, Mike's question is really interesting because he was the one who brought it to my attention about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that for business owners who have bought in, like, you know, we've got to make change. And I'm really trying to work on myself and I'm understanding I need to work from my strengths, but I can't communicate this to my team. I keep getting the eye rolls because they've seen me do one initiative after another. And they're just thinking, here I am, here's another initiative. There really needed to be some help in translating the initiatives and really getting the leadership team to buy. And so we created a program called Leadership Bootcamp. And it's not for the business owners, but it's for the next people in the business who would be leaders. And what's really fun to see happening, Darren, is when 2 or 3 people in a business start to learn about how to be, if they're already A players, and they start to learn about how to work from their strengths and how to be more and more valuable on the team, now that business owner has some allies in change. And it makes it, you know, you talk about shining the light on the cave dwellers. Now it's not just the business owner who's shining the light on the cave dwellers. There's several people in the business. And it also seems to create this phenomenon where the other team members get really curious. Like, you guys are talking about strengths and you got to take this test. And I want to know what my strengths are. How come I haven't gotten to do that yet? So it starts to create a bit of a tsunami wave effect. But it does, like when you're starting out, it can feel like, boy, this is a big boulder I'm having to push uphill.
It really does. I think that's a great point. It's giving those A+ players that are on your team, it's giving them the chance to actually sail forward without the drag, because they're the ones that you're going to find on the extra mile, but they're the ones that have been dealing with and managing a lot of the times, dealing with how do I dance around this cave dweller that's holding us back. They work within the context of that, but by them being able to move forward, they can actually play as A players. So that's what you're giving them the freedom to do, because we're talking about strengths. And many, many teams that we work with, again, small organizations, small businesses, all the way up to large organizations that have small 8-person, 4-person teams, what they do is when they're looking at putting a new project together, one of the first things they do, Dr. Sabrina, you know what they do is they look at the strengths and say, what do we need on this? Now, the important part to mention, we've all seen the Golden Gate Bridge or suspension bridges. The Golden Gate Bridge doesn't stand because the cables are slack. It actually stands because there's a healthy amount of tension pulling each way. The strength of the bridge, the strength of the small business, the strength of the team that comprises that is not the fact that we all are pulling the exact same way. It's the fact that there's a healthy amount of tension that gives rise to the best ideas, the best processes to come forward, but we all feel safe to be who we are through the filter of our talents and communicate and operate in a space where our talents can really thrive, not survive. When you're in an environment, when you're feeling completely crushed, you're feeling kind of like the waters, you're just getting blown out of the water. The experience that I had in construction years ago, I had my talents, but they were in a place where they were surviving. So even though I might have been an A+ player or an A player, I was surviving with those talents, taking them to survive and adapt because the environment really wasn't there for them to thrive. That's what we create.
Yeah. So you talked earlier in a conversation we've talked about playing from strengths and looking at what's working versus what's not working. And I know as a psychologist, our human nature is when there's a problem in the business, we focus on the problem. That gets all of our attention. And we start going down this path of we're looking for all the problems. Sooner or later, that's all we see around us is one problem after another, which is very detrimental to the business owner's mindset. And it creates this phenomenon of feeling kind of like you're the boss on patrol. Like you're just walking around. Yep, there's another thing wrong. Yep, there's another thing wrong. Why can't these people get anything right? What's wrong with me that I keep hiring these goof offs? And it's just a downward spiral. So you, coming from a strengths perspective, you have some ideas about how that can be turned around. So can you speak some to that?
Yes. So with a strengths-based mindset, when we started to fold that into our teams, it's much easier for us to catch other people on our teams doing things right, as opposed to just seeing what's broken. And when we start catching people doing things right, what does that do? That actually plays into the whole area of motivation, drive, right? Sometimes it's easy for us to say, oh, my employee's just not driven. They're just not motivated. They might be a wall of motivation, but we've put a lid on it. So what it is, because we've never captured them doing anything right, all we do is capture, oh, this didn't go well, this didn't go well. We've got to make sure that we're dealing with those areas, but really invest in the areas of what are the things that they are doing right? How are the dots connecting to the forward progress that we have? What that starts to happen there is then that gets kind of baked into your organization, to your small team, the dynamics. Because it's not just me as the owner catching people right, it's my teammates feeling like it's good to catch us doing things right, because that just becomes the language that permeates the organization. And what starts to happen is you kind of level off as if we've only been focused on the negative, and you can start rising up from that. And as you see more and more of what you're doing right, it can have massive impacts on your business and how you look at your customers in terms of how you treat your customers, the real areas of impact. Because sometimes we can get focused on the negatives, and then next thing we know, that spiral takes us to a place where we're fixing things in the business that actually aren't even really things in the business, where people are dealing with situations that maybe don't create that much value, but that one thing that was done right, that we didn't recognize, that we didn't capture, might have had massive dividends it could have played, but we've actually squashed that. So what starts to happen is the light has been shined on the thing that maybe has a very, very little ripple effect, but the big element that was done right, we didn't capture that.
So what we focus on grows.
We are what we focus on. There was a great story that I heard. I'd gone to Tony Robbins years ago to Unleash the Power Within. And Joseph McClendon, he's one of Tony's just top speakers that's out there. And he shared this story when he was working in Los Angeles. There was this 2-lane stretch of highway. And on this 2-lane stretch of highway, one side of the road had telephone poles every, I don't know how frequently spaced they are, every 100 feet, 200 feet, whatever it is. The spacing's not the relevant part. But what would happen on this road is consistently there'd be accidents, and somewhere in the range of like 60 to 70% of accidents would end up with one of the vehicles hitting a telephone pole. So Joseph, being who he is, he ends up going through and he's thinking, and he says, this makes no sense to me, because a telephone pole is how big versus the open, flat dirt space that's in between? Why is it that the cars are hitting the telephone pole and not the open dirt spaces that are right there where they could have survived? This didn't make any sense. So he started interviewing those that had survived. And the fascinating part that came out of that was, for those that had survived, many of them had the same story, even if they'd hit the telephone pole. And the story was simply this. I was looking and this car came, it swerved into my lane, and the last thing I saw coming at me was the telephone pole. They were so focused on not hitting the telephone pole, by focusing on the telephone pole, they didn't see the wide open dirt space that they could have gotten into. We can't hit what we're not focused on. And the big area of dirt was actually the area of strength, survivability, whatever you want to call it, that was right there, that was just fascinating to him. And that was the whole point. We are what we focus on. And that's the area that we can get our energy and our growth as businesses. That's why we want to focus on strengths.
That's a great story, a great analogy. Thank you for sharing that with us.
No problem.
So, Darren, we're all about profit on the Profit by Design podcast.
No way. I didn't know that.
You had no idea, right?
I have to sign off. I don't believe in them.
It's not just all about let's have a business and feel good. We want to make it a profitable business where we feel good.
I love it. So, that's why I'm here.
I know, I'm teasing you. So talk to me about what is the impact on the profit in a business when we get our teams, when we create a great place to work, when we have team members operating daily from their strengths and they're happy, they're engaged. What does that do for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is from probably the most comprehensive analysis that Gallup had done in 2015 on this. And they do this every several years. They're probably in the round of re-aggregating that data. But the range that they found in this 2015 meta-analysis, where they actually studied, I think it was just under 50,000 different work groups just across the globe. What they found was the increase in profitability ranged from 14% to 29%. And that's a pretty large spread. The other area is shift in attrition from 6% to 72%. And lower safety incidents, right? The shift was from like 23% to 59%. And then the final one I'll share with you, without killing you with all the statistics, is a shift in sales, an increase in sales from 10% to about 19%. Now, the big question that comes is, why is there this range, and why is there such a massive range? So what we've got here is kind of like the sugar rush of energy versus the long-term transformation of your health to where you have more energy regularly, right? So what it is, the range, what it captures is teams that just took the StrengthsFinder and went through just taking the assessment. They had a little short-term bump. So that's what's on the lower end of the spectrum. The larger long-term bumps that we see, this is when they've really worked on folding the language into their teams. There's many organizations that I've worked with, there's many teams I've worked with, they'll say, oh, we've done StrengthsFinder, but all they've done is taken the assessment, and I'll say, well, what does that mean? And they'll put up their top 5 on their door, on their cubicle, or by their office. I'm like, okay, but what does that mean in terms of how you're using that to impact and interact with each other? It's not about taking an assessment. The assessment, all it does is tell you that the talents are present. The work that you have to do is figure out now, how do these pieces of the puzzle actually connect for us tangibly, tactically, and how can we utilize these intentionally and purposefully? That's why you have the range. On the higher end of that range, that's where they've really folded it into how they're developing their teams, how they really go at projects, how they collaborate, how they maybe even adjust their sales pitches and their processes. That's why it has that impact.
You know, I get really excited about strengths work because as a Profit First Mastery member, we are helping our clients all the time with driving the profit in the business. And usually that starts with expense cutting. But there's a certain point, and it's usually after about 3 months, where there's no more expenses to be cut. And we have to look at how to make the business run more and more efficiently. So those statistics that you cited, I think those are statistics that come from large corporations. It runs the gamut of the size of the business. When we're talking about a small business and we have 10 team members and they're all aligned in the right roles, working from their strengths, the impact on the profitability, I would think, would be even higher than what those statistics reflect.
That's such an important point to make. I think you're spot on, because you're not turning an aircraft carrier around at that point. You're much, much leaner. You've got a really, really tight-knit team. Absolutely, that growth cycle can be massive. And we have seen that with some of the businesses that we've worked with as well.
Yeah. So I think at this point, Darren, we should tell our listeners about this very cool thing that we have coming up, that we're teaming up to do together to help small business owners build teams that are working from their strengths. So do you want to share some about that?
Yeah, we're doing this magical program called Leading Your Small Business with Strengths. And the whole point of this is what we're going to be doing is we're offering a program that's going to be a series of webinars, and you will actually get to take the StrengthsFinder assessment as well. And you will also get a chance to have an individual walkthrough with one of our 34 strong actual coaches. We'll be running it. I will actually be facilitating the webinars personally myself in there, but you'll actually have 2 coaching sessions as part of that. So the first one really gets into that deeper dive on the self-awareness. As we go through the series of webinars, we're going to give you some of the nuggets and some of the tools and parts and pieces as to how do you really fold this into your people strategy? How do you fold this into your people development strategy, not only for now, but for the future? And thinking about that, why this actually matters. The next coaching session that takes place after these webinars go through really lends itself into the place of the performance elements. What are the goals that you're setting for yourself It's helping to set you up for long-term accountability to really make this stick for you as a small business owner. So we've gone through, this is the introductory process for what we do actually with some of our much, much larger scale clients, with some of our corporate clients, and what we've done with companies like Bank of America, with the FDA, state of California. But this has also been used in small business teams, exactly like this, or in a large company on a very, very small micro team that has elements like that. So we teamed up and decided this is a great way to give that experience with a webinar-based component and really create some tangible impact for all of you.
Right. So that's what I want to clarify, is that you're taking something that you have delivered many, many times that's had a tremendous impact in large corporations and in micro teams within the larger corporations. And we have created it so that it's available and economical for a small business and small business owner and key team members to take part in this with you.
I guess leading off of my other question from before, we were talking about the ramp up process. So if I go through the introductory webinar and the coaching sessions, what kind of foundation is that going to build for me? And what could I expect in terms of, maybe for myself, changing my mindset and kind of getting some things started within my company to build a strength-based company for sustainability? And then what's potentially after that? I mean, what's the next steps?
Yeah, so two-tier there. So the first phase on the personal elements, what any participants would gain is they would deepen their understanding who you really are and who you aren't. They would learn the language of strengths and talent, of how we actually see ourselves, that self-awareness of our strengths. Keep in mind that our strengths can be our greatest assets and actually our greatest liability. So we will actually get into diving into what that means. We're saying play to our strengths. We have to also manage our strengths, and we can manage our weakness instead of trying to become them. So that's what they'll learn, is the actual process of how do we get into that. We'll develop a framework for complementary partnerships. So this is getting into the component of how does it go for me, as from self-awareness to team awareness. So it'll develop a framework for how do we actually build complementary partnerships around talents. And we're going to get into the understanding of how creating culture, even in a small business, I would say even more so in a small business, is so critical in creating employee engagement. The real question is, how can you not afford to invest in your people? Because if you only have a small team of 4 or 5 people, everything that they do matters incredibly to your business. In the ocean, you got one bad performer at a Bank of America, the whole bank's not going to fall apart. When you're a small business, you're a team of 5. One person being a cave dweller is going to eat right away at everything that you have. So it's getting to understanding as well of your role as an owner and making that a reality. We get into strengths-based goal setting and how do we align our teams on that. We actually build out a team talent map for the participants that are in this program, so they can actually see, how does my team actually align through strengths and what that means? What are their contributions and what are their needs?
So with that team talent map, can you give us some examples of maybe some small businesses that have gone through that process, and what has shifted, what has changed now that they're utilizing their team talent map?
Yeah, what was really, really interesting, I'll talk to you about Mike's team, Mike Halowitz's team at Profit First Professionals. When they went through the initial just team discovery process, they went through a slightly different program that we've gotten through, but we've worked directly with their team all intact together. But they got to a place, him and Ron, his co-founder, really got to a place where they were starting to understand their communication styles a lot better, how they could better communicate, how they could better message, how they could delegate a little better. I'm not talking about Mike and Ron, but just how delegation and how different roles could actually fit more impactfully, and how we could create a culture where people would take better psychological ownership of things. It started allowing people to understand as well, one of their team members tends to need a little bit more time to think through components. There's other team members that really go and they're in a team meeting and they're just firing off, and you ask them a question, they're firing off these thoughts, these ideas. They're more verbal processors. Understanding the difference between somebody that's a verbal processor that's actually talking things out and thinking versus somebody that needs a little time to think it's going to better set you up because you can understand, I'm going to need to plant this seed with this person. They're going to need to take a beat to think about it. And maybe I need to reconnect with them later today or tomorrow, instead of pushing them to make a decision that they're going to regret later. And then we're setting them up for failure as well. And then we're going back and fixing it, 3-4 days later also.
That's awesome. So Mike, I want to go back to your question earlier. What if Darren, a business owner, is listening to this and he's like, this is awesome. I want to do it. I want my number 2, number 3 person to do this with me. And how do I get their buy-in? What do I need to say to them?
Well, I mean, just using my own personal experience, I didn't really understand for a long time what the level of importance that culture played, even in a small organization. And, just hearing everything about, I think the 2 things that stick in my mind are to play off of the strengths and not the weaknesses. And I think just thinking about those 2 things, just writing those 2 items out on a piece of paper and really taking a look at it and say, how many times did I make a mistake as the leader of the company by focusing on the weakness and not the strength? And, again, when we talked a lot about mind shift changes, and I think this program and the material around it and just creating a new mindset of creating this company, right? Creating the culture, the communication format, building deeper relationships on a professional level with the team members. And I mean, I can even see, utilizing these tools like you were talking about with your wife, Darren. It's like the 5 love languages, right? I mean, it can permeate through all these other spots of, other places of your life that you didn't even think were possible, because now you're taking a very positive viewpoint on all of your interactions. So it's looking inside and maybe, humbling yourself a little bit and, knocking yourself down and not having such a big ego and really just saying, I need to look at this a different way. So, I think this is the evolution, I think, that we were faced with as entrepreneurs and business owners, where we do need to look harder to find employees and build teams. Just putting ads out there and finding people, we all know that hasn't worked in years and it's never going to work again. So creating that new environment, mindset, culture, focusing on strengths, I think is really a step in the right direction, hands down.
I want to comment on that because on the Profit by Design podcast, we're always asking the big question, what has your business done for you lately? For myself, I have had the greatest self-development program that I could have ever put myself in by running my business. And taking part in something like the program that Darren and I are offering is that opportunity to learn more and more about yourself. And it's going to impact personal life, just like what you're getting at, Mike. And in terms of talking to team members about it, this is a program that they're going to take part in. It's really about making them better and happier. I think that's what it comes down to, right, Darren?
Yeah. There's a great quote that's always resonated with me for many years. This was even before my 34 Strong days. It always stuck with me. And I don't think I knew why until I really got into, co-founding 34 Strong with my business partner, Brandon Miller. And it was simply this: if you think investing in your people is expensive, try not investing in them. And by that, I don't mean the kitchen sink approach, because that is the big challenge. We've all been in small businesses where it's like, hey, we're going to do this today, we're going to do that. Nothing sticks. The whole point is, if you want to create that long-term component that really creates that shift and that your organization can thrive off of, you got to have that foundational piece. And having that mindset of a strengths-based focus is critical. I do want to say something about what Mike was talking about for the business owners with buy-in, with different things. One great way to approach that also is when one owner is talking to a leader in their company, you got to look in the mirror and you got to ask, are we a successful company? Are we going to be a successful company because we're identical, because we're exactly the same? Or is it that we're different? What are the things that I do well? What are the things that you do well that actually allow us to balance? A great story, I remember there was a gentleman out here in Sacramento. His name's Kyle Finley. He founded a company called Twin Termite. And Kyle, when he started the company, he had gotten, by the time we started working with him, he was maybe a $1 million business. Maybe not quite that. He was going through some pretty significant pain points. He had hired a number two in his leadership team. And he was a big idea guy. He talked things out, come up with these ideas. He could go in front of a crowd or go in front of a customer, get them ready to go and get their services sold and locked in and loaded. He hired another person before he started working with us that was, guess what? Exactly like him. So they'd have these epic meetings. They go through and they talk about all these things. And then a week later, they're like, hey, how come nothing's happening? You're doing that. Wait, what? Who's supposed to be doing this? Neither of them could get beyond that big picture strategy, the idea part. They didn't have somebody that could fall in line behind the scenes and execute and make it happen. And then conversely, you've got some people that are really, really good at like executing, going through different things. But when they really need to do the big picture stretch on the thinking, that's the part a little bit more of a grind for them. So how do we fill in those blocks? That's what it is. But it really comes back down to that quote. If you want to if you think investing in your people is expensive, try not investing in them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a tremendous point. And investing in a focused way, not just throwing the kitchen sink in a hodgepodge of, let's do this training and let's do that training, but making sure that it's all moving down a similar path into building a strengths-based organization with highly engaged people in a great place to work that, by the way, is pretty darn profitable along the path. Yeah.
Yep. And your culture truly is your brand. That's the whole thing. Your internal culture that you have, that's your internal brand, your employee-facing brand that becomes your external-facing brand. It's what does that embody? What do you want it to represent out there? So you've got to think about that.
All woven together.
You got it.
So Darren, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm really looking forward to this event that we're going to put together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabrina. Thank you so much, Mike. What an honor it's been to be on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So Profit Designers, you've just heard Darren share with us all kinds of ways that we stand to benefit in our businesses by getting ourselves and our team members aligned with our strengths. And I want to let you know that the opportunity to learn more from Darren is right here at your fingertips. He has agreed to take me up on my offer that we would do a collaboration between Tap the Potential and 34 Strong. And the training that Darren typically delivers live and in person in these businesses can be pretty expensive for a small business owner to absorb. So I asked him if he would be willing to work with me and use what I know about delivering web-based training, and if we could take what he delivers live and develop it into a web-based training. And he said yes. So we have that coming up in just a couple of weeks, and the registration deadline for you and your team members to get in on this is rapidly approaching. So here's the deal. The training is called Leading Your Organization from Strengths. It is a combination of web-based training and one-on-one coaching sessions. It's a huge, huge value. To get registered and to see all the details, head on over to tapthepotential.com/34. Again, that's tapthepotential.com/34. And we have a savings code for you Profit Designers. Code PROFIT will save you $100 off your registration. And if you are registering team members, you can also use another code called SAVE100 to save an additional $100 for each team member that you register after you register. Thank you for spending time with us today. Join our conversation in the Profit by Design podcast Facebook group. Share your thoughts on today's episode, ask us questions, and let us know what you want to hear about next. Visit our website at profitbydesignpodcast.com to access resources from our sponsors and tools we've created for you. Subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening to right now. There's a subscribe button right there. Go ahead and hit it so that you always get a notification when we release a new episode. And finally, share our podcast with a friend if you know a friend who would enjoy it. Thanks again for listening. This is real life business. Keep your chin up, keep moving forward. You got this.